Hello and welcome back to Superpowers, the future of global security with me, James Heapy. Today we're joined again by Michael Bociurkiw, global affairs analyst, author and founder of the World Briefing Report on Substack. Michael, welcome back for your third, I think maybe even fourth visit to the show. You're very welcome. And yet again, we've chosen a busy week and month in which to speak. The USS Abraham Lincoln is now on post, in theatre, poised to allow President Trump to launch strikes against Iran. So let's start there. What's your prediction for what happens over the next few days and the next weeks? Is Trump going to go there?
Good to be back with you. And I have to say, trying to predict these days what Donald Trump is going to do or what Donald Trump is going to think has become a very, very challenging sport. I would rather bet on the weather than what he does in the next few days. But anyway, having got that out of the way, I do wonder about the strategy because, of course, this happens on the back of U.S. Intervention, let's call it, in Venezuela. U.S. strikes in northern Nigeria, a whole bunch of other foreign initiatives, which I'm not so sure his MAGA base really voted for or expected him to do. The big kind of hope when Donald Trump came back to power was he will focus on the United States and at least the Western Hemisphere. So these are really stretching resources. But this is a man of confidence. We have to give him credit for that. Yet again, in Davos, he took credit for solving at least 8 wars, with perhaps another one to go. He's still, as you know, very challenged with the war in Ukraine, although we are hearing rumblings of a possible deal there. But where I am, for example, in Thailand, the Thai-Cambodia conflict, another one he claims to have solved, is still, the embers are still burning. It's calmed down a bit because of impending elections here, but still. But going back to this, I can't see real appetite for this at home, and we do see this happening as well as his poll numbers are falling. The so-called unfavorability rating as the cost of essential items goes up. So there is, as you well know, sir, a strategy sometimes about leaders when there are problems at home that are difficult to fix, then you switch the focus to overseas, but that will not work. Americans, for the most part, I was there over the Christmas New Year period, are not looking for the United States to be the world's policeman. Now, there's also a lot of confusion within Iran itself, because on the one hand, Mr. Trump is signaling as the good guy that I'm going to come and, make things better for you. And just wait, we're coming to your rescue. But meanwhile, the clerics, the thugs have had a long time to kill thousands of protesters and, of course, manipulate technology so that it's very difficult to get messages out. And of course, as you probably know, James, better than I do, there's a lot of nervousness in the region right now with some key Gulf allies saying our airspace cannot be used for these strikes because they're worried about the blowback as well. We also, to make the situation even more complicated, we have Israel in the background, which is for sure probably pushing for strikes in Iran to weaken it further. So it's not quite sure, but if I take the example of Venezuela, in the months before, it only looked like a manufactured drug interdiction program. Even the most seasoned analysts were saying there's not going to be a military intervention, and there was. So I would give it a 50-50 chance right now, but it could come at tremendous cost, and also the not only capability of Iran, but also its proxies in the region to strike on American targets. It's a very, very anxious time.
Yeah, I think I share that view that it still may well not happen, but the Lincoln has sailed a long way, and that strike group is very, very well armed and looks like it means business.
Yeah.
The military folly in it, as far as I can see, is an aircraft carrier the size of the Lincoln will allow it to do everything it needs to do on night 1, night 2, night 3. But the idea that if it ends up in a protracted effort to sort of to topple the Iranian regime, to do all of that without any access, basing, or overflight from partners in the region, to have to do it all from carriers
Yeah.
is a big ask, and it feels to me like even for the US, that might be militarily too challenging.
Yeah, and of course, sorry, James, I suppose too, if you could argue as Mr. Trump, oh, well, we're there really to protect commercial shipping lanes of the Red Sea and so on, where of course Iran has access. That is one thing, but I have not heard that argument come out from them. So, because that is something you can sell back home and say, we're protecting the shipping lanes, keeping the cost of goods, cost of energy down, but I'm not hearing that.
People in the administration have suggested to me that there is a nub of people very close to Trump who regard Iran as unfinished business from Trump one, and that this is, it's not about how this plays at home. There is no real strategy to it. This is just
Mhm.
a bit like the people around George W. Bush who had been in his father's administration over Iraq. That there's just a sense of, we've got to get Iran sorted because we didn't do it last time.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. But you do makes you wonder. It does make you wonder how stretched are U.S. military resources? How exposed does they make them? Because remember, the Trump circle was complaining about Ukraine, that it's consuming all these Patriot missile systems, and don't forget, Israel, its Golden Dome, whatever it's called, program it has suffered as well from a lot of expended kit, and that needs to be replenished. So I'm wondering how much influence as well into the Trump thinking the guys in brass, the guys in uniform have as well.
Yeah, well, this is a recurrent theme. Last week, we were having a discussion about exactly this. The degree to which the U.S. military needs to start saying, you know, Mr. President, you are the most powerful man on earth. You've got the most powerful military on earth, but even your power and this military has a limit to how much it can do at one time. And if you want us to be doing the Caribbean and South America, and you want us to be doing the first and second island chain in China, and you want to do something in the Gulf, that's an awful lot to ask of your navy, and maybe we need to sequence this. Can the Iranians give the US a bloody nose here?
Uh, Hard to say, but I'll tell you one thing, James Fury, while you were speaking, I did think, there is some similarity between the strategies of Xi Jinping and Mr. Trump. If they're generals that you disagree with or you don't like, you just get rid of them. And the numbers are pretty big if you count them up on both sides. And that is worrisome. Um, but, there's also a factor here that Iran has, as you know, many evil partners around the world, Russia being one. We're going to see in this how much or how little Russia will come to the aid of Iran. We didn't see much blowback in Syria and not much in Venezuela as well. And then we also have to put into this mix that it's been the Iranians that, at least in the first 2 years of the war, provided a lot of that drone technology and physical drones to the Russians to fight the war in Ukraine. And, I believe the Russians also have been reciprocating with nuclear technology, things like that. But, if you look to your question, if you look at the stockpiles that Hezbollah has, and again, through their proxies, I think Hamas is a spent force, but Hezbollah and others in the region, what the pain and the disruption that they can inflict, that's a very, very serious concern as well. We don't know who some of their other big allies of Iran are providing to them. We know that they do operate, for example, a sizable fleet of ghost ships shipping oil. And I think when you have that crucial energy flow coming out of Iran, two, we don't have to name them, but you can guess who they are, two very, very influential partners, they could be drawn into this as well because they're a vital interest to be defended.
I agree. It all feels very combustible, but so does the world, frankly. Which is a good opportunity to talk about China. You've been writing about China's campaign against the scam economy. Tell us a bit about that.
Sure. Well, these scam centers, enormous, enormous numbers in terms of the numbers of people scammed. And let's be clear on one thing. This is not people, for example, sitting around in these big apartment buildings here in downtown Bangkok. This goes way deep into the United States and other countries where you have probably about 6 or 7 countries from the Philippines, Vietnam, Laos, and many from China coming here to the region, to Thailand, for example, and being trafficked into these scam centers, which tend to be established in lightly governed areas or areas where you have non-state actors in control. So Myanmar is a big one, or was a big one. And it's interesting because when China, which has been heavily affected by this, not only Chinese nationals running these scam centers, but also Chinese nationals and a huge, huge Chinese tourism here into Bangkok coming and being scammed into working into these centers. And trust me, these are not call centers like one sees in India or elsewhere. These are very, very sophisticated operations, not only in terms of technology, but they're virtual prisons as well. Once you're in there, you're not leaving until they say so, or until you've paid back any debts you have to them. So a lot of different threads to this. But what is very interesting, James, in this one, China state media reported the other day, which prompted World Briefing to write about this, is they executed quite a few members of one particular family or gang or cartel that was running among some of the biggest scam centers. And I think they decided in not only forcibly repatriating these bad actors back to China and dealing with them on Chinese soil, is to give them the maximum penalty possible. They're leading them to the shooting range, and that's it, execution. So that sends out a very strong signal to anyone thinking of going to run these or who is currently operating, that this will not be tolerated, and that, yes, China, we will go after you. You have to remember one thing. China is the sheriff now in this region of the world. They have been for quite some time, but I think this is also them flexing their muscles, saying to Thailand, the generals in Myanmar, the non-state actors in Myanmar, sorry, Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, that we're in charge here. And it was interesting. As part of this story, we also looked at what's going on in the Philippines, and they've also had many Filipinos trafficked to these scam centers. But there was a recent survey done in terms of which countries Filipinos trust the least, and China came out as number one. Now, a big factor, of course, for that is China's activities in the South China Sea and their attacks. We can't call it anything else, I think. The attacks on Filipino fishing boats, really coming close to Chinese naval vessels and causing problems there. And like this, you're being a military guy, is China. It's very interesting to watch the nuances of what they do, but what they've been doing is deploying a fleet of Coast Guard ships to the region to show everyone who's in control. And I can tell you, these Coast Guard ships are not there to save dolphins for people from drowning. They pack a powerful punch. They're a big threat. I have read previously that some of these so-called Coast Guard ships have the same power on top as an Abrams tank, so they can inflict quite a bit of damage. At the same time, what's been happening is China's been building a lot of shoals or reclaimed land in these contested areas, but it's a wide swath of territory that China is claiming, and they have the means to do it. As you know, China is on a huge military modernization campaign. Part of this is to prepare, I would say, for the eventual reunification of Taiwan. They're not going to do it quite yet, but again, so let's go back quickly to the beginning, is that yes, China is flexing its muscles. And I think it's interesting too that on the one hand, of course, they have a lot of influence over the generals in Myanmar and certainly over decision makers here in Thailand, but they're also able to deal with these ethnic groups or ethnic militias for non-state actors and get them to deliver these bad actors back to Chinese hands, and then they're repatriated back to China. So, on the one hand, it's very, very good what they're doing, because these scam centers, as we wrote in World Briefing, it's like, a cancer. That's inflicted itself all over the body. I mean, you may take care of it in one part of the organism, but it appears elsewhere. So new technology, new actors coming in, it's very, very difficult to control this. And one last thing here, what's very, very interesting too, is last year when this problem did really peak, and it's almost Lunar New Year now here in the region. But last year during Lunar New Year, just before it started, the then Thai Prime Minister made a video, especially addressing Chinese nationals, saying it's safe to come to Thailand. And it was dubbed in Mandarin as well. So the message got out, because it can really, really hurt a country like Thailand, so dependent on tourism, but especially Chinese tourism, if that flow stops because of bad PR.
So it's interesting to hear your analysis, because it's an example of where China, as one of the big economies in the world, has a responsibility to police global cybercrime. And whilst I suspect that, certainly the European governments in the G7 and the Canadian government would not be particularly supportive of the death sentence for these people, the sort of China taking its responsibilities to police the global commons is a responsible act by a superpower. But the challenge is that, of course, beneath the surface of all of this will be a challenge to ASEAN members, a reminder that China regards ASEAN as its backyard and will exercise its power in whatever way it sees fit. Not just in the policing of cybercrime, but as you note, in the way that its Coast Guard behaves within the South China Sea. Well, and you touched on there the sort of the different views within ASEAN. You mentioned in Myanmar, there's a sort of regard for China, and Thailand, there's an economic dependency. The Singaporeans and the Filipinos are obviously a bit more circumspect. But what's your sense? I wonder if the fact that the US seems ever more belligerent and ever more introspective, do ASEAN start to sort of become a bit less equivocal and a bit clearer that China is the neighbor and China is the more pressing threat?
It's a great question. I expect ASEAN to become more outspoken, more, shall we say, interventionist, as much as I expect the African Union leaders to suddenly wake up tomorrow and start speaking out about human rights abuses in Uganda, where President Museveni has just flattened opponents and a lot of violence was unleashed there. So it ain't going to happen. I've spent a lot of time working and living in this region, know ASEAN very well. It's a kind of mentality here where things are settled quietly. Yes, Myanmar, evil generals, there's currently an election wrapping up, and it's been widely regarded as not free and not fair, but yet hardly a peep out of the neighbors. So this is a big problem here. And I think, let's say, the responsible states in the region, and sorry, by the way, there's an ongoing election campaign here in Thailand. The responsible states, we look at Singapore, for example, if you stand for non-aggression, if you stand for your, sovereignty of your country, of your borders, you have to speak up. You have to defend it, whether in statements in terms of what you see happening in your region, or in voting in the UNGA, or if you're a member of the UN Security Council. But, the Singaporeans, as they should, their relationship with China is very, very important. But also at the same time, they're a kind of beacon of pragmatism. And I remember Lawrence Wong, the current prime minister, said quite a few months ago when President Trump started to wield his tariff baton, that he basically said, this is it, guys. We are heading into uncharted territory. And we have to recognize that things have changed very, very quickly. And I guess that's, even though Singapore is described as a beautiful house in a bad neighborhood, that's the beauty of Singapore. Given its size, it can quite quickly shift gears and point in another direction. And let's not forget, it's a global finance center. It's a very important hub for shipping. So they're what they do and how they adapt is very, very important. But the other thing I see, and it's not limited to the ASEAN region, is you have military coups, but then you also have these men who have taken over through military means, quietly change from military fatigues into Versace suits, or to move from barracks to palaces, government palaces. And the population quickly forgets that they seize power through non-democratic means. One more point here, because we're talking about democracy in ASEAN and elections. I just spoke to a bunch of young Thais here today, and I do ask them, well, so are you hopeful? Are you really involved in this election? They say, we are monitoring things, but we're not, expecting much change. And finally, given the just unpredictability of the world economy and the state of the world altogether, there's a lot of nervousness here. And let's not forget the rapid advancement of AI and technology and changing job descriptions. A lot of anxiety here in terms of what the elected leaders can actually do to make their future any better.
I, it, it's fascinating to hear those reflections, and I can well imagine that for plenty of young Thai,
Yeah.
whose region, that it's been the sort of fast growth area, really benefited from the sort of the last 25 years of change in the global economy, but the next bit brings uncertainty. Can I get you, Michael, just to quickly reflect on the succession of European and the Canadian and Korean leaders too, who've all been sort of filing through Beijing? Starmer is there this week. Merz is due next month. Carney's been recently. Um, is this is it not just ASEAN that's having to hedge its bets? Is the rest of the West rapidly realizing that the US isn't quite the reliable partner that it has always been? And is that causing this rush to reacquaint with Xi, or is it just coincidence that this is all happening now?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I was just speaking with a compatriot of yours right across this table a few moments ago, and we were reflecting on Keir Starmer's visit to Beijing, and he basically checked off the list of everything that was negotiated there, including visa-free access. And I agree with him. He said there's nothing that was agreed to or negotiated that will change Keir Starmer's popularity at home or get him reelected. These are like issues that aren't not discussed around the dinner table. Is something's going to happen on these issues. And an astute observation was made. This is somebody who has a lot of experience here in the region. He said, the Chinese, and I agree with him, are very, very good at signaling or nuances. And you'll see when the visit was made by His Excellency, your British Prime Minister, to the Forbidden City, the crowds were not cleared away, as has been done for other world leaders who come there. So I'm not saying this is a sign of disrespect, but certainly a sign that we're in charge and we're going to treat you accordingly in terms of how we see your place in the world. You brought up the name Mark Carney, my prime minister. I did listen to his very widely applauded speech in Davos. There was one thing, however, that he left out, and that is that he can credit Donald Trump for being elected to office. I think that's something we can all agree to. I was covering the Canadian election on the ground there, and previous to my arrival in Canada, Mr. Poilievre almost had a 20% lead, and it was only when Trump started to threaten Canada, starting to call Justin Trudeau, the next governor, that Canadians started to think, we need someone who's really going to stand up. There's a Canadian term, a hockey term, elbows up, and Carney got the real big Trump bump. And I did watch his visit to China, and it's interesting, how things evolve these days, not only in terms of what actually happens, but our perception. I'll give you a quick example that's quite visual. In World Briefing, we did an editorial cartoon early in the day, just as Carney was leaving his press conference, his farewell press conference in Beijing, and he was checking off all of these accomplishments. Among them, of course, is the relief for Canadian agricultural products, for more trade between the two countries, but also China is given an opening in terms of exporting cars to Canada, which really upsets the Canadian industrial heartland, especially Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario. But anyway, so we ran this editorial of a friendly but naive-looking Canadian beaver in a tight embrace with the Chinese panda, and the beaver already had some light superficial scratches on it, and the caption was, "Be careful how tightly you embrace the Chinese panda because it may leave you with scratch marks." And we meant, unfavorable trade deals, stealing of intellectual property, things like that. But then later in the day, once Carney was on his way home, Donald Trump piped up. He said, "Good for Mr. Carney in terms of what he did. But to me, as a Canadian, and knowing what we do with Donald Trump, I said, there's bad stuff to come." And indeed, it did come, these threatening tariffs. So we changed the editorial cartoon. The Canadian beaver and the Chinese panda are in a tight but almost romantic embrace. But meanwhile, up above, you have the menacing American eagle keeping careful watch with its claws ready to dig in. So this is the way the world that people like Mr. Carney are operating in. And the other thing we noticed as Canadians, we do have core values, and among them are human rights. And Mr. Carney made it clear that this was a business visit. That was his time and a place for bringing these issues up. But it was quite a departure from previous Canadian prime ministers. Now, one more thing that I think is very, very important. Let's be clear on one thing, too. One of the reasons that the bilateral relationship between Canada and China is in such a mess goes back a few years. You may recall the name Meng Wanzhou, the CFO of Huawei, who is detained by Canada on a U.S. arrest warrant. Now, being good Boy Scouts, goody two-shoes Canadians, we served that arrest warrant and we detained her for a long time. We could have looked the other way. We could have let the U.S. Mexico, or we could have let her go on back to Hong Kong, but we didn't. And that was a very costly mistake. It ended up in the two Michaels being detained for a long time and a real severing of the relationship. So we're bringing that back together. The other thing poor Mr. Carney needs to do is also repair the relationship with India, which has been damaged by alleged Indian illicit activities, basically assassination of an opponent on Canadian soil, meddling in elections, that sort of thing. But that should be Mr. Carney's next trip. So, kind of to wrap this up, is that's the world we live in, is that we are in survival mode. This is an existential threat to Canada. We cannot look overnight to embrace partners far away because our trade flows are so oriented north-south right now. They need to go east-west, but it cannot happen overnight. The other thing, as I actually said on Indian television this morning, is that, I think it was former Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau who once said, living next to the United States is like a mouse living next to an elephant. You're sensitive to its every move, its every kind of emotion almost. And I have lived in a border town in Canada. We see the United States in many places of Canada. As soon as we wake up, we share the same wildfires, the same natural disasters. So a permanent, complete decoupling cannot happen because we will be in free fall. So I don't envy people like Mr. Carney, but one last thing, because I think of this because I was recently in South Africa for the G20, and I saw that the Trump circle has recently told the South Africans, thank you very much, but you're not part of the G20 while we're chairman. It's going to be the G19. And that really upset the South Africans. But, their president said to the G20, if that's the way you're going to act, we're going to go on our own. And Mr. Modi of India said something similar. Look at Mr. Lula in Brazil. So maybe, James, there's a need for a kind of coalition, the unwilling of these countries that are perhaps vulnerable to Trump's tariff threats, military threats, to stand up and say enough is enough, and we're going to group and share resources and go forward. Let's see what happens.
So I think that that unaligned movement is alive and well. In fact, I spent a lot of my time as a minister going around trying to sort of say, look, to be unaligned is actually to be aligned with Russia and China. There's a like be unaligned in a sort of macro sense in terms of how you navigate global affairs, but right is right and wrong is wrong.
Right.
But the challenge is that what the US are doing at the moment gives people like the Brazilians, the Indians, the South Africans, the Indonesians, and these are important countries in the emerging global economy. These are big countries. They all of a sudden are not so clear that the US is right and China is wrong. It is very challenging. Mike, I'm conscious that our time really is up, but I can't let you go without checking in this nuts world that we're now living in. When I next go to the Calgary Stampede or skiing in Banff, am I going to be arriving in Canada, the independent Republic of Alberta,
Huh.
or the United States of America?
Ah, what a great question. Well, look, I'm a native Albertan. I was born there. I spent a lot of time there. I continue to go there. I have relatives there. I feel to my core as an Albertan. But no, there is a rumbling separatist movement there, and they've reportedly even have gone to the Trump circle or to MAGA folks and asked for funding, which is really upset other people or other provinces in Canada. But I think what's going to happen, look, the biggest threat right now to Albertans, because they too are vulnerable, they have basically a one horse economy, and that is oil. If Mr. Trump does strong arm these skeptical oil executives, American oil executives, to actually go to Venezuela, spend billions of dollars on restarting the oil economy there, getting that crude oil out, which, by the way, is perfectly suited for the refineries on the Texas Gulf Coast. That, if they can get that going, say in 5 years or whatever, that will significantly lessen U.S. reliance on Alberta oil. It's quite similar. It's actually very costly to extract it from oil sands. It's energy intensive. But I don't like to give Mr. Trump and his circle too much credit, but that could be part of their strategy. Is maybe they've had it with Canada. Threatening is not enough. Let's put the squeeze on them in terms of our purchases of oil. And their east-west pipelines just are not there, not the capacity to start pumping oil to other big customers. Nor do we have the capacity, though we could have done this a while ago, is build LNG terminals on our maritime coast to start shipping gas to European countries so we can help them lessen their reliance on Russian energy. And anyway, the analysts I've read say that if this were to happen within 5 years, the Albertan economy for sure would be on its knees, and also the Canadian economy because of those heavy transfer payments that happen between Alberta and also Ottawa. And that's, as an Albertan, I can tell you that it's been a source of tension between us and the rest of Canada when that, again, Pierre Trudeau introduced something called the National Energy Policy. It led to a lot of anger within Alberta. But no, I don't think it'll lead to. I think what no pun intended, what will trump everything else what is happening here is our patriotism, our sense of unity. We fought long and hard to get where we are as Canada. Sure, we've let certain things fall by the wayside. Our influence in places like the UN, cutting development aid, which is very important for soft power. But we have come way too far to start allying ourselves or separating and becoming part of the United States. Don't forget also that Alberta does not border wealthier states like New York State, or for example, it borders Montana, Idaho. It's a very different mix there, and it's also landlocked as well between British Columbia and Saskatchewan. Uh, One more thing here, and maybe it's too much getting into the weeds here, but the one thing Carney has to do as well is deal with things domestically, promoting more intra-provincial trade, lowering the cost of getting that energy out of the ground, the transfer payments. as we see in many countries in the world, you see smaller parts of countries delivering disproportionately to the capitals, and that creates a lot of anxiety. But no, we welcome you, sir. I can't help but still call you minister, to Canada. Take advantage of the great skiing. We didn't talk about Ukraine, but maybe next time. But huge Ukrainian diaspora there. You can have the most delicious Ukrainian potato dumplings. You can go horseback riding. You can go watch buffaloes roam on open prairies. You'll have a great time.
Michael, look, thank you very, very much indeed. I'm conscious that we have gone over and denied you the delights of Bangkok for probably 5 or
Thank
10
you.
minutes longer than we should have done. But thank you for joining us on Superpowers again.
Likewise.
You've been watching Superpowers, the future of global security with me, James Heapy. For more episodes of Superpowers and Frontline and the Trump Report, make sure that you subscribe below. But for now, see you next week. Goodbye.